the developers are working on a new patch from day one, and they're coding into an existing game. They have to make sure that, one, they don't break the rest of the game with something new, and two, that the new character, or in your case with Paladins, the new champion, isn't so overpowered or OP. And so they have to create this nice sort of balance. Given your experience kind of in that sort of situation, how difficult is it to kind of keep that balance? And then how can you describe sort of how you go about that from the developer side?
Sure. So when we create new things, I'll talk about champions specifically. Obviously, there's different types of content, different types of systems. But when we create new champions, part of what we want is to create something, and this is a mantra you'll hear from a lot of different people, a lot of different companies. I think Blizzard is probably the most famous for using this, is easy to learn, difficult to master. Mm-hmm. And I personally like to couple kind of that with something that is unique. I mean, obviously everyone will want something unique, but something that is unique to a particular experience or a particular way that people interact with the game is what I like to put into something new. So if we're creating a new champion, for instance, we could talk about the most recently released champion, Vora, who is a flank. Traditionally, that role would be played by a relatively easy to kill character, but one who has the ability to get in, do a lot of damage, get maybe an important pick or two on the other team, and then either die for their sins or be able to escape through some mechanism. Vora, it does something a little bit different. She is a flank, but most of her damage is delivered with a damage over time rather than flat damage. And that's a lot different than most people would traditionally feel for flanks and paladins. And a lot of her kit is also based around her passive, which provides a lot of sustain. She has a passive that she's able to get stacks when she hits things with her in-hand. And when she uses abilities, she consumes those stacks and is healed over time for each stack that is consumed, which is also a flavor, right? Everything's a flavor. So, for Vora, I wanted to do something a little bit different, and we're always striving to introduce something new with each champion that we do, because if it's just the same flavor of flank that we always have, then the game will get stale, and it's the same exact champion. So what we needed to do for Vora is we needed to introduce this mechanism, this damage over time mechanism, in a way that's not, as you said, not OP or not oppressive, but is still interesting to play and is still effective to some degree. Mm-hmm. There were multiple iterations with her. I'll talk specifically about the damage over time component. There were multiple iterations with her. I played around with the difference in damage between the on hit, like the flat hit from getting hit by a projectile, versus how much damage was applied over time. I started off also increasing and decreasing the duration of the damage over time. So was this damage done over 1 second or like over 3 seconds? Mm-hmm. We found that it was extremely unsatisfying no matter how much damage was in the dot. I'll use dot as a shorthand for damage over time. Okay. No matter how much damage was done in the dot, if the flat damage was non-existent or very small, like let's say they have 1,000 health. If I hit them for 10 and then did 500 in the dot, it still wasn't as satisfying as having some amount of damage in the flat and then some amount in the dot. And that's a combination of people's familiarity with the types of damage that flanks already do, which is generally, like I said, burst, and the idea that, I expect this hit to do something, and when it doesn't do something, it feels wrong. Yeah. And a lot of times it's difficult for people to articulate that. It just doesn't feel satisfying. It feels wrong. So we played around a lot with that. We found that longer damage over time effects didn't feel satisfying either, because even if you were doing more damage, it was like tick, 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 and they're walking away, and it doesn't, like, I can't get the kill. They're getting healed or whatever. So we had to iterate on that, both in, like, from my side, like I was playing around in the editor alone, and then we also have dev side play tests. Mm-hmm. And that's even before we go to a public test server where people can give us feedback externally as well. But so for me, we played around with those different numbers. We kind of landed on a place that was okay. Some builds I would make her a little bit too strong just to see how that felt. Was it oppressive to play against? Make her a little bit too weak, see how that felt. Was it oppressive to play against? Was it fun to play?
Hmm.
And that's kind of how we wiggle our way into a general balance state with the idea, with the understanding that we already have general ideas for what is okay. Like a 5-second stun feels like crap, regardless of who does it.
Yeah.
Or like in that 1,000 HP average example, if they have 10,000 HP, that's going to feel oppressive regardless.
Yeah,
So
for
within those
sure.
kind of general generic bounds, you can play around with those numbers to find something that feels organic,
Hmm.
and feels familiar while also introducing something new. And yeah, and real speaking on something new real quick, there have been. I'm really proud of how Vora released. I think she's fairly balanced as far as things go. But there were, and some people absolutely love her, and some people absolutely don't like her because they view her as recycled content from other champions, which is kind of interesting.
Mm.
We have a projectile that is similar to another champion, so obviously it is, the same as that champion. We have a modified version of, there's another champion who has a vine pull, so we modified that to more of an impulse swing, but people of course said you literally just copied this other ability. And so kind of that dichotomy between, can we introduce something that's familiar,
Hmm.
but not so familiar that people will rage that it's exactly the same as something else, even if it isn't, and can we introduce something that's new that feels different to play, but not outlandish, I guess. That's kind of a
Sure.
long-winded answer for how do you balance things, but when creating new stuff, that's kind of the general process we go through.
No, it's a good one. And real quick before we move on, I feel like obviously I think we'll be talking about paladins quite a bit. Do you want to just go through a quick sort of summary of what the game is for those who don't know or aren't familiar with it?
I think that's a great idea. So Paladins is a hero shooter. It occupies the genre with probably the two other games you would most likely have heard of are Overwatch and Team Fortress 2 are also hero shooters. They're typically characterized by small-sided matches, 5 to Team Fortress 2 up to 9
Hmm.
competitively, with different characters or different champions or heroes or however you want to call them. They each have their own identity, and they usually each have their own either statistics, abilities, which we call like an ability kit, is a set of all of the abilities,
Hmm.
or both. And so a champion might have a set HP and 5 abilities, and those abilities are, they're the only ones who can use those abilities, and that becomes who that champion is. And then usually there's, you vie for control. It's a control point or a payload or something like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's the general gist of it. So, and they can they're usually either first or third person. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Sounds good. I think that's a pretty succinct and accurate summary. I think from here on out, I think most people will understand. If you don't, Google it.
Yeah.